They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when your own sister decides your boyfriend looks better on her arm than yours? My name is Emma Rodriguez, and this is the story of how my 26th birthday party became the beginning of the most devastating betrayal of my life. But it's also the story of how I discovered exactly how powerful I could be when I stopped playing nice and started playing smart. What my sister Madison didn't know when she set her sights on my boyfriend, Jake, was that I'd learned to document everything. And what Jake didn't realize when he fell for her act was that the engagement ring he bought for me would become the very weapon I'd use to destroy them both. This isn't just about a stolen boyfriend or a scheming sister. This is about what happens when the quiet one finally decides to roar. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should probably start by explaining the dynamic between Madison and me, because if you're going to understand how this all unraveled, you need to know exactly what I was dealing with. Picture this: two sisters, 3 years apart, raised in the same house in Austin, Texas, but somehow existing in completely different universes when it came to how the world treated us. Madison was born beautiful. Not just pretty, but the kind of stunning that made strangers stop mid-conversation to stare. Long dark hair that never had a bad day, green eyes that sparkled even in terrible lighting, and that effortless grace that made every movement look choreographed. More importantly, she was born with an instinct for getting what she wanted. Even as a toddler, she could turn on the charm like flipping a switch. Tears that appeared and disappeared on command, smiles that could melt the hardest hearts, and a way of making her wants seem like everyone else's responsibility to fulfill. I was the opposite in every way that mattered socially. Brown hair that required constant management, average height, average build, average everything. But I was smart, reliable, and hardworking. While Madison was learning how to bat her eyelashes to get out of trouble, I was learning that being competent and responsible was my path to approval. I became the daughter who never caused problems, never demanded attention, never rocked the boat. I was Emma the dependable, Emma the understanding, Emma who would figure it out and make it work. Our parents divorced when I was 12 and Madison was 9, and that's when the real pattern established itself. Dad moved to Houston for work, visiting every other weekend when his schedule allowed. Mom threw herself into her nursing career, working double shifts to keep us afloat financially and emotionally. In the chaos of restructuring our entire lives, Madison discovered that being fragile and needy got results. The more delicate she seemed, the more everyone rushed to protect her from any additional stress or disappointment. Meanwhile, I learned to be the steady one. I helped Mom with bills, made sure Madison got to school on time, handled the grocery shopping when Mom was working late. I became a mini adult at 12 because someone had to be, and Madison remained a perpetual child because everyone let her. This dynamic followed us through high school, where Madison dated the quarterback while I focused on my grades and college applications. It continued through college, where she studied communications and spent most of her time at sorority events, while I double majored in marketing and business administration. Even as adults, the pattern persisted. Madison worked at a boutique marketing firm, where her main qualification seemed to be her ability to charm clients over expensive lunches. I worked at a tech startup where my analytical skills and strategic thinking actually mattered. But here's what I never understood until it was too late. Madison wasn't just naturally lucky or blessed with easy success. She was actively strategic about identifying what other people had that she wanted, and then systematically figuring out how to take it. She'd done it with friends, stealing my high school best friend Sarah by suddenly becoming interested in all the same activities Sarah and I enjoyed together. She'd done it with opportunities, talking her way into an internship I'd applied for by convincing the hiring manager that she'd be a better cultural fit. She'd even done it with my college boyfriend Derek, who I'd brought home for Christmas. During my junior year, only to find him exchanging numbers with Madison by New Year's Eve. Each time, the narrative was the same. It just happened. Madison couldn't help who she was attracted to, who she connected with, what opportunities called to her. Everyone would rally around the idea that these things were natural and unavoidable, and I would be expected to be understanding and mature about the situation. After all, I was the strong one. I was the one who could handle disappointment. I was the one who put family harmony above personal feelings. Looking back, I can see how perfectly I'd been trained for this moment. 26 years of being told I was the reasonable one, the one who didn't need as much attention or protection or consideration. 26 years of watching Madison get what she wanted, while I got the satisfaction of being the bigger person. 26 years of believing that my worth came from how gracefully I could handle being overlooked. But at 26, I finally had something that felt completely mine. Jake Thompson wasn't the most obviously attractive guy Madison had ever encountered. He wasn't wealthy or famous or connected to anything glamorous. He was a software engineer, quiet and thoughtful, with dark hair that was always slightly messy and brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He wore the same 3 button-down shirts in rotation and knew more about coding languages than fashion. Trends. He wasn't the type of guy Madison usually noticed, except Jake noticed me in a way no one ever had before. He listened when I talked about work challenges and actually offered useful suggestions. He remembered details about conversations we'd had weeks earlier. He thought my strategic mind was sexy, not intimidating. When I got excited about a project or an idea, he didn't tune out or change the subject. He leaned in and asked questions, because he genuinely wanted to understand what made me passionate. We'd been together for 2 years, and for the first time in my life, I felt like the chosen one instead of the consolation prize. Jake had met Madison at family events and holiday gatherings. He was polite to her, but he never seemed particularly impressed by her usual arsenal of charm and beauty. If anything, he seemed to prefer my company to hers, gravitating toward conversations about books and ideas rather than Madison's stories about her latest dating drama or workplace gossip. I thought that meant something. I thought it meant I'd finally found someone who valued what I had to offer over what Madison had to offer. I thought it meant I was safe. The first sign that I was wrong came about 3 weeks before my birthday. Jake started acting different in small ways that I initially dismissed as work stress. His responses to my texts became shorter and less frequent. Our usual evening phone calls got cut short by mysterious, urgent tasks that couldn't wait until morning. When we were together, he seemed distracted, like part of his mind was somewhere else entirely. When I asked if everything was okay, he assured me it was just a busy period at his company. They were launching a new product. He was up for a promotion. Everything would settle down soon. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, and because Jake had never given me a reason not to trust him. The second sign came when he started asking seemingly casual questions about Madison. How was she doing after her latest breakup? Was she having a hard time finding the right person? Did I think she was happy living alone? These questions felt natural enough in the context of normal family conversation, but there was something about the way he asked them that felt different. Too careful, too interested, too focused on details that had never seemed to matter to him before. I told myself I was being paranoid. Jake was a naturally empathetic person, and Madison had been going through a particularly dramatic breakup with her boyfriend of 3 months. Of course, Jake would be concerned about my sister's well-being. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's what good boyfriends did. They cared about their girlfriend's family members and wanted to make sure everyone was okay. But the third sign was harder to rationalize away. 2 weeks before my birthday, Jake started working late more frequently, often texting me around 9 or 10 at night to say he was just getting home and too tired to talk. This was unusual because Jake was typically very disciplined about work-life balance. He'd always said that one of the reasons he liked his job was that they respected employee boundaries and rarely demanded overtime. When I drove by his office, building one of those alleged late nights, his car wasn't in the parking lot. I sat in my own car for 20 minutes, staring at the empty space where his Honda Civic should have been, trying to come up with innocent explanations. Maybe he'd gone to dinner with coworkers. Maybe he was running errands. Maybe he'd parked somewhere else. Maybe I'd misremembered which night he was supposed to be working late. But deep down, in the part of my brain that had been cataloging all these small changes and strange behaviors, I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't bring myself to investigate further because I was terrified of what I might find. Instead, I threw myself into planning my birthday party with the kind of obsessive attention to detail that I usually reserved for work projects. I researched recipes for homemade tacos, bought special beer from Jake's favorite brewery, hung string lights on my small balcony to create the perfect ambiance. I invited 15 people, all carefully chosen to create the right mix of my closest friends and Jake's work buddies. I even bought a new dress, a deep green wrap dress that Jake had complimented when I'd tried it on at the store months earlier. I told myself that this party would reset whatever weird energy had been building between us. Once we were back in our normal social environment, surrounded by people who knew us as a couple, things would return to normal. Jake would remember why he'd chosen me, why we worked together, why our relationship was worth prioritizing over whatever distractions were pulling his attention away. I spent the entire day of my birthday cooking and decorating, texting Jake periodic updates about timing and logistics. His responses were enthusiastic and affectionate, full of excitement about celebrating me and promises that he had something special planned. By 6 o'clock, when guests started arriving, I felt confident that I'd been overthinking everything. Tonight was going to be perfect. Jake arrived right on time, carrying flowers and a bottle of wine, looking handsome in the blue shirt I'd bought him for Christmas. He kissed me hello with genuine warmth and spent the first hour being exactly the boyfriend I remembered. Attentive, funny, engaged with my friends, helping me serve drinks and making sure everyone felt included in conversations. Then Madison arrived. She was an hour late, which was typical for Madison but unusual for family events involving my boyfriend. She'd always made an effort to be punctual when Jake was involved, claiming she wanted to make a good impression as the future sister-in-law. Tonight, she swept in wearing a black dress that was somehow both elegant and provocative, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite claiming she'd rushed over from work. "Sorry I'm late, birthday girl," she announced, hugging me, with dramatic flair. Work was absolutely insane today, and then I couldn't decide what to wear, and you know how I get when I'm stressed about looking appropriate for your friends. She said this last part with a laugh that drew attention from everyone in my living room, immediately making herself the center of focus in that effortless way she'd mastered. Within minutes, she was charming my coworkers with stories about her own job, complimenting my friends on their outfits, and seamlessly inserting herself into every conversation. But it was her interaction with Jake that made my stomach drop. I was in the kitchen refilling the guacamole bowl when I heard her laugh. Not her normal laugh, but the specific musical giggle she used when she was flirting. I looked through the doorway and saw her sitting next to Jake on my couch, closer than necessary, her hand resting on his arm as she leaned in to tell him something that was apparently hilarious. Jake was staring at her with an expression I'd never seen before. Complete fascination, like she was the most interesting person he'd ever encountered. His body language had shifted entirely from the relaxed, familiar posture he'd maintained all evening to something more alert and focused. I watched them for several minutes, telling myself I was misinterpreting the situation. Madison was naturally tactile with everyone. Jake was just being polite to my sister. This was normal sibling-in-law interaction at a family gathering. But then Madison started crying. Not the dramatic sobbing she usually deployed for maximum effect, but delicate, almost invisible tears that only someone sitting very close to her would notice. Jake immediately became concerned, leaning closer to ask what was wrong, offering her his napkin, speaking in the gentle, protective tone he usually reserved for me when I was upset. I couldn't hear what she was telling him, but I could see the effect it was having. Jake's entire focus narrowed to Madison's face, his expression shifting from concern to something deeper and more personal. When she touched his hand while explaining whatever tragedy had befallen her, he didn't pull away. When she suggested they step outside for fresh air so she could compose herself without embarrassing me at my own party, he immediately agreed. I watched them walk out to my balcony through the sliding glass door, Jake's hand hovering protectively near the small of Madison's back. I watched him give her his jacket when she shivered delicately in the evening breeze. I watched them talk, in low, intimate voices while my birthday party continued around me. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was watching my sister steal my boyfriend at my own birthday celebration. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, though that felt like being stabbed. The worst part was the performance of it all. Madison's tears were perfectly timed and strategically deployed. Her vulnerability was calculated to appeal to Jake's protective instincts. Her suggestion to step outside removed them from my direct supervision while maintaining the appearance of appropriate concern for my feelings. This wasn't a spontaneous moment of unexpected attraction. This was a plan being executed with precision and skill. I spent the rest of my birthday party watching my sister work her magic on my boyfriend while pretending to enjoy myself for our guests. Every time someone asked where Jake was, I made excuses about him helping Madison through a difficult time. Every time someone commented on what a sweet guy he was for being so supportive, I smiled and agreed while dying inside. When they finally came back inside, Madison announced that she was feeling much better thanks to Jake's wisdom and kindness. Jake looked flushed and energized in a way that made me feel sick. They didn't sit together again, but the damage was done. The invisible connection between them was now visible to anyone who cared to look. The party ended around midnight with the usual round of hugs and thank yous and promises to get together soon. Madison left early, claiming exhaustion from her emotional crisis, but not before hugging Jake goodbye with extra warmth and thanking him again for being such a good listener. Jake stayed to help me clean up, but everything felt different now. His movements were distracted, his conversation forced. When I tried to bring up Madison's tears, asking if she'd told him what was wrong, he gave vague answers about general life stress and assured me she'd be fine. As he was leaving, I asked if he wanted to have dinner the next night, just the two of us. He hesitated for just a moment too long before explaining that he had plans he couldn't change. When I suggested the following evening instead, he said he thought he might be getting sick and should probably stay home and rest. After he left, I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by empty bottles and leftover cake, finally allowing myself to acknowledge what I'd spent the entire evening trying to deny. My sister had decided she wanted my boyfriend, and based on what I'd witnessed tonight, she was well on her way to getting him. The question now was what I was going to do about it. For 26 years, I'd been the understanding sister, the one who stepped aside gracefully when Madison wanted something I had. I'd been trained to prioritize family harmony over personal happiness, to be the bigger person, to accept that Madison's needs somehow always took precedence over mine. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't just taking a thing or an opportunity. She was taking 2 years of my life. 2 years of building a future with someone. 2 years of believing I'd finally found my person. This time, I wasn't going to step aside gracefully. This time, I was going to fight back. I just had to figure out how. The morning after my birthday brought the kind of Austin heat that makes you question why anyone chooses to live in Texas. I woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with spending 8 hours watching my sister systematically dismantle my relationship while I smiled and played the perfect hostess. Jake's good morning text arrived at 11:30, 4 hours later than his usual 7:30 check-in. The message itself was cheerful enough. full of thanks for the wonderful party and apologies for not staying later to help clean up more thoroughly. But the timing felt deliberate, like he'd spent the morning thinking about what to say and how to say it. I responded with equal casualness, thanking him for coming and for being so kind to Madison during her difficult moment. I didn't ask what they'd talked about on the balcony. I didn't mention the way he'd looked at her or the obvious chemistry that had sparked between them. Instead, I played the role I'd been perfecting my entire life, the understanding girlfriend, who didn't make waves or create drama. But privately, I was conducting an experiment. I suggested lunch that day, claiming I wanted to hear his thoughts about the party and catch up after our busy week. Jake declined, explaining that he'd promised to help his roommate move furniture. I offered to bring dinner to his place that evening. He said he was feeling exhausted and thought he might be coming down with something. Each excuse was reasonable on its own. Together, they painted a picture of someone actively avoiding spending time with me. Meanwhile, Madison was experiencing a remarkable recovery from whatever emotional crisis had required Jake's comfort the night before. She called me around 2 p.m, her voice bright and energetic, full of praise for how well the party had gone and how much she'd enjoyed meeting more of my friends. "Jake is really wonderful, Emma," she said with just the right amount of sisterly affection. "You can tell he really cares about you. The way he jumped in to help when I was having my moment last night, it just shows what a good heart he has." The comment was perfectly crafted to sound supportive while actually serving multiple purposes. It established that something significant had happened between them that required Jake's intervention. It positioned Jake as the hero of Madison's story, rather than a participant in whatever had unfolded. And it subtly reminded me that she'd been the one receiving his attention and care during my own birthday celebration. "What exactly happened?" I asked, keeping my tone light and concerned. "You seemed really upset about something." "Oh, just the usual post-breakup blues hitting me at the worst possible moment," she replied with a laugh that sounded slightly forced. "You know how I get when I start overthinking my love life. Jake was so sweet about it, really helped me put things in perspective." "What kind of perspective?" There was the briefest pause before she answered. "Just that sometimes what you think you want isn't actually what's best for you. And sometimes the right person has been there all along, but you don't see them clearly because you're looking in the wrong direction." My blood went cold. Madison was many things, but subtle wasn't usually one of them. This philosophical musing about love and perspective wasn't random birthday party conversation. It was a direct message about her intentions regarding Jake. "That's interesting advice," I managed. "Did he say anything else?" "We talked about a lot of things. He's really easy to talk to, isn't he? I can see why you two work so well together." The way she said "work together" made it sound like a business partnership rather than a romantic relationship. Like Jake and I were compatible colleagues rather than lovers building a future. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone, trying to process what I'd just heard. Madison wasn't being coy or mysterious about her interest in Jake. She was being strategic, laying groundwork for what came next while maintaining plausible deniability about her motives. The next few days confirmed my worst fears. Jake's communication became increasingly sporadic and impersonal. Our usual lengthy phone conversations were replaced by brief texts about schedule changes and work obligations. When I suggested meeting for dinner that weekend, he explained that he needed to focus on a major project deadline and wouldn't have time for social activities. But Madison's social media told a different story. She posted photos from a downtown restaurant that same Saturday night, looking radiant and happy in a way that seemed inconsistent with someone nursing a broken heart. One photo showed her laughing at something off camera, her hand positioned as if she was reaching for someone else's across the table. I spent Sunday morning driving around Austin, not really going anywhere specific, just needing to move and think. I found myself parking outside Jake's apartment complex around noon, telling myself I was just checking to see if his car was there. It wasn't. But as I was preparing to leave, I saw Madison's red Honda Civic turning into the parking lot. I drove to the far corner of the lot and watched her park 2 spaces away from where Jake usually left his car. She sat in her vehicle for several minutes, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror and typing on her phone. Then Jake's Honda appeared, and I watched him park directly next to her. They got out of their cars simultaneously, greeting each other with the kind of familiarity that suggested this wasn't their first secret meeting. Jake was carrying a bouquet of flowers. Madison was wearing a sundress I'd never seen before, something flowing and romantic that made her look like she was starring in a movie about finding unexpected love. I watched them walk toward his apartment building together, Madison's hand, finding Jake's arm as they talked. I watched Jake use his key to let them both inside. And I sat in my car for another hour, staring at the building where my boyfriend was entertaining my sister, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with this information. The rational part of my brain knew I should confront them immediately. March up to Jake's door, demand an explanation, force them to acknowledge what was happening, and deal with the consequences. But another part of me, the part that had been trained through years of family dynamics to avoid creating scenes, hesitated. What if I was misinterpreting the situation? What if Madison really was just a friend helping Jake through some personal crisis I didn't know about? What if barging in on them would make me look paranoid and controlling, giving them reason to justify whatever was developing between them? More importantly, what if confronting them now, before I fully understood the scope of their betrayal, would give them the opportunity to craft a story that painted me as the unreasonable one? I drove home and spent the rest of the day researching something I'd never thought I'd need to know: how to catch a cheating partner. The internet was full of advice about surveillance techniques, evidence gathering, and strategic timing. Most of it felt sordid and desperate, but one piece of guidance resonated with me. Document everything. Don't rely on memory or emotional impressions. Collect concrete evidence of dates, times, places, and conversations. Build a complete picture before making any accusations or decisions. That night, I started a private document on my laptop, recording every detail I could remember about Jake's behavior changes over the past month. The late work nights that didn't correlate with his actual office schedule. The questions about Madison's emotional state. The shift in his communication patterns. The flowers and secret apartment visits. As I typed, patterns emerged that I hadn't fully recognized while living through them. This wasn't a sudden attraction that had sparked at my birthday party. Jake had been pulling away from me for weeks, creating emotional and physical distance that would make his transition to Madison feel more natural and less jarring. The realization that I'd been systematically manipulated was almost more painful than the betrayal itself. They hadn't just fallen in love despite their best intentions. They'd planned this, coordinated it, managed it like a project with specific goals and timelines. But if they could be strategic about destroying my relationship, I could be strategic about protecting myself. Tuesday morning brought the phone call I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Jake's voice sounded strained and overly casual, like someone who'd rehearsed what he wanted to say but couldn't quite manage natural delivery. "Hey, Em, I was hoping we could get together tonight. There's something I need to talk to you about." The formal tone sent ice through my veins. People don't schedule conversations about good news. They don't use that particular combination of seriousness and false lightness unless they're about to deliver information they know will cause pain. "Of course," I replied, matching his careful neutrality. "My place or yours?" Actually, I was thinking somewhere neutral. Maybe that coffee shop on South First where we had our first official date. The location choice felt deliberately cruel, though I doubted Jake had considered the emotional implications. He was probably just thinking about public spaces and comfortable seating, not the symbolic weight of ending our relationship in the same place where it had truly begun. I spent the day preparing for the conversation in the same methodical way I approached work presentations. I reviewed my documentation of the past weeks, anticipating his likely explanations and crafting my responses. I wasn't going to make this easy for him by falling apart or creating a dramatic scene. I was going to listen, ask clarifying questions, and gather as much information as possible about their timeline and future plans. Most importantly, I was going to maintain my dignity while he destroyed my life. Jake arrived at Cafe Luna 10 minutes late, apologizing profusely about traffic and work delays. He looked genuinely nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup and avoiding direct eye contact. Whatever speech he'd prepared, delivering it was clearly more difficult than he'd anticipated. "Emma, I need to be honest with you about something, and I know this is going to be hard to hear." I nodded encouragingly, playing the role of the understanding girlfriend one last time. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us lately, about where we're headed and what I want from a relationship." "Okay," I said softly, giving him space to continue. "The thing is, I've realized that I have feelings for someone else." There it was, the admission I'd been expecting since Sunday afternoon. But hearing it spoken aloud still felt like being punched in the stomach. "I see. How long have you been having these feelings?" Jake shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting such a direct question. "It's not something that happened overnight. It's been building for a while, but I didn't really acknowledge it until recently." "Recently meaning when, exactly?" "Emma, does the timeline really matter? The point is that I can't continue our relationship when my heart isn't fully in it. That wouldn't be fair to either of us." I studied his face, noting the way he deflected my question about timing. "I think I deserve to know when my boyfriend started developing feelings for another woman. Was it before my birthday party?" His silence answered my question more clearly than words could have. "Who is it?" I asked, though we both knew I already knew. Jake's face went pale. "It's Madison. My sister Madison. Yes. The same Madison who came to my birthday party and cried on your shoulder about her recent breakup." "Emma, it's not what you think. Nothing inappropriate happened between us while we were together. But the connection, the feelings, they're real. And I can't pretend they don't exist anymore." I wanted to laugh at his definition of appropriate. Secret meetings and flower deliveries apparently fell within his moral boundaries, as long as they hadn't physically consummated their relationship yet. "Have you told Madison how you feel?" Another pause that spoke volumes. "We've talked about it." "And she feels the same way?" "Yes." "So you've both been discussing your mutual attraction while I was planning my future around our relationship." "Emma, I never meant for this to happen. Madison didn't either. Sometimes you can't control who you fall in love with." The rehearsed quality of his explanation made it clear that he and Madison had prepared for this conversation together. They'd anticipated my questions and crafted responses designed to minimize their culpability while painting their betrayal as an act of unavoidable fate. "When did you first realize you had feelings for her?" "I don't think dissecting every detail is going to help anyone move forward." "I'm not asking to be vindictive, Jake. I'm asking because I need to understand how long I've been living in a fantasy while you and my sister were building something real." He sighed deeply, like my request for basic honesty was an unreasonable burden. "Your birthday party was when I first really saw her differently. But the feelings have been developing since then. Since 11 days ago. Emma, you're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm making this harder?" "Jake, you're telling me that you've fallen in love with my sister and want to end our 2-year relationship, and I'm the one making things difficult by asking for details? I just think it would be better for everyone if we could handle this maturely, without a lot of drama or blame." Without drama or blame. He wanted to dismantle my life and have me thank him for his honesty and maturity. He wanted to steal my future and be praised for his emotional authenticity. "What happens next?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you planning to start dating Madison immediately? Are you going to wait some respectful period of time? Are you going to pretend this is a coincidental rebound rather than the reason you're leaving me?" Jake looked genuinely uncomfortable with these practical questions. "We haven't made any specific plans. We just know that we need to explore what's between us." "But you've already been exploring it. The secret meetings, the flowers, the intimate conversations about your feelings. You've been dating my sister while pretending to be my boyfriend. That's not fair, Emma. We've been honest about our connection. We haven't crossed any physical lines." The arbitrary moral boundary he'd drawn around physical contact was fascinating. Emotional infidelity, relationship planning, and secret romantic meetings were apparently acceptable as long as they kept their hands to themselves. "Have you kissed her?" "Emma, have you kissed my sister?" "Not while we were together. But you've wanted to." "Yes. And she's wanted you to." "Yes. And you've talked about wanting to kiss each other." This conversation isn't helping anyone. I sat back in my chair, studying this man I'd thought I loved and trusted. The Jake I'd known for 2 years would never have been capable of this level of calculated deception. Either I'd been completely wrong about his character, or Madison's influence had revealed aspects of his personality that I'd never seen. "I have one more question," I said finally. "Okay. Do you love her?" Jake met my eyes for the first time since sitting down. "Yes, I do." "More than you ever loved me?" He looked away again. "I love her differently than I loved you." "Not differently. More." The past tense wasn't lost on me either. Whatever he'd felt for me was already relegated to history, something that had happened before he discovered what real love could feel like. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse and jacket. "Thank you for being honest with me." Jake looked surprised by my calm response. "Emma, I hope someday you can understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You fell in love with someone else and decided to pursue that relationship instead of the one you had with me. It happens. People change their minds about what they want. You're handling this really well." "I'm handling this the way I handle everything, Jake, by being reasonable and mature and putting other people's happiness ahead of my own feelings." As I walked away from that coffee shop, I felt something I'd never experienced before in the aftermath of Madison getting something that belonged to me. Instead of resigned sadness or familiar disappointment, I felt coldly, precisely angry. They thought they'd managed this situation perfectly. They thought they'd minimized the damage and handled the transition with admirable sensitivity. They thought I'd be grateful for their honesty and impressed by their restraint. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning brought a text from Madison that was so perfectly crafted I almost admired its calculated manipulation. "Emma, I heard about you and Jake. I'm so sorry, sweetie. Are you okay? I know this must be incredibly hard. Call me when you're ready to talk. Love you." The message accomplished several goals simultaneously. It positioned Madison as the caring sister who'd learned about my breakup from an external source rather than being directly involved in causing it. It established her as someone offering comfort rather than someone who owed me an explanation. And it created the impression that she was giving me space to process rather than eagerly waiting to discuss her new relationship. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I spent the morning at my laptop, adding Jake's coffee shop confession to my growing documentation file. His admissions about the timeline, his acknowledgement of their mutual feelings, his confirmation that they'd been discussing their attraction while he was still my boyfriend. Everything carefully recorded with direct quotes wherever possible. Around noon, Madison called. When I didn't answer, she left a voicemail that was even more masterfully constructed than her text. "Hi, Em, it's me. I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking about you, and I'm here if you need anything. I know Jake talked to you yesterday. and I can only imagine how you're feeling right now. I want you to know that nothing happened between us while you two were together. I would never do that to you. But I also can't lie about my feelings anymore. I hope we can talk soon, because you're my sister and I love you, and I don't want this to come between us. Call me back when you're ready. The voicemail was a masterpiece of preemptive damage control. Madison acknowledged the situation while maintaining the fiction that she'd been a passive participant rather than an active pursuer. She emphasized family loyalty while subtly preparing me for the revelation that she intended to pursue Jake openly now. Most importantly, she framed any future conflict between us as my choice rather than the natural consequence of her actions. I saved the voicemail and added notes about its content to my file. Then I did something that Madison and Jake weren't expecting. I called her back. "Madison, hi. Thank you for reaching out." She sounded genuinely surprised to hear from me so soon. "Emma, how are you holding up?" "I'm processing everything. It's a lot to take in. I can only imagine. I feel terrible about the timing of all this." "The timing?" "Well, Jake realizing his feelings so soon after your birthday. It must feel like everything changed overnight." "Actually, I get the sense that things have been changing for a while. Jake mentioned that his feelings have been developing for some time." There was a pause while Madison recalibrated her response to this information. "I think he was just trying to be honest about the fact that these things don't happen instantly. But from my perspective, it really did feel sudden." "When did you first notice that he might have feelings for you?" "Emma, are you sure you want to talk about these details? I don't want to make this harder for you." "I think understanding what happened will actually help me process it better than wondering and speculating." "Okay, well, I guess I first noticed something at your birthday party. The way he looked at me when I was upset. The way he listened when I was talking about my breakup. It felt different than the polite attention you usually get from your sister's boyfriend." "Different how?" "More personal. More connected. Like he really cared about what I was going through. Not just because I was your sister, but because I was me." Madison was describing the experience of being seen and valued as an individual, which was ironic considering that her entire strategy depended on leveraging her relationship to me. "And that's when you started having feelings for him too?" "I think so. Although I didn't really acknowledge them until later." "When later?" "Emma, I'm not sure this is helpful." "Madison, please. I need to understand what happened so I can figure out how to move forward." Another pause while she weighed her options. "We've talked a few times since your party. Nothing inappropriate, just conversations about life and relationships and what we're both looking for. And I realized that Jake and I have a lot in common, more than I'd noticed before." "What kind of conversations?" "Just talking through my feelings about David and Jake sharing some of his thoughts about commitment and partnership. He's such a good listener, Emma. He really helped me see my situation more clearly." I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Madison was describing their affair as a series of therapeutic conversations where Jake had generously provided relationship, counseling while discovering their deep compatibility. It sounds like he was very supportive during a difficult time for you. He really was. And I think that's when we both started realizing that there might be something more between us than just family connection. "Have you spent time together? Since my birthday party?" "A little bit. Nothing romantic, just talking through our feelings and trying to figure out what they meant." "Where did these conversations happen?" Madison hesitated. "Different places. Coffee shops mostly. Sometimes at his apartment if we needed privacy to really talk through everything." His apartment, where I'd seen her red Honda parked on Sunday afternoon, where Jake had greeted her with flowers and the kind of intimacy that suggested much more than therapeutic conversation. "Madison, can I ask you something directly?" "Of course." "Are you in love with Jake?" The question hung in the air for several seconds before she answered. "I think I might be." "And he's in love with you?" "He says he is." So you're planning to start a relationship? We're going to explore what's between us and see where it leads. Explore what's between them, like they hadn't already mapped every inch of their mutual attraction during weeks of secret meetings and intimate conversations. I want you to be happy, Madison. Really? She sounded genuinely surprised by this response. Really? You're my sister, and if Jake is the person who makes you happy, then I hope things work out for you. Emma, you're being so understanding about this. I was terrified that you'd hate me. I could never hate you. You're family. Thank you for saying that. It means everything to me. There's just one thing I need from you. Anything. I need you to be honest with me about the timeline. Not to make anyone feel guilty or to assign blame, but so I can understand what was real and what wasn't in my relationship with Jake. What do you mean? I mean, were you interested in Jake before my birthday party? Did this really start that night, or had you been thinking about him for longer? Madison's silence stretched long enough that I knew she was deciding how much truth she could risk telling me. I had noticed him before, she admitted finally. He's always been sweet to me at family events, and I thought he was attractive, but I never considered acting on it because he was with you. When did you start considering acting on it? Honestly, after David and I broke up. I started thinking about what I really wanted in a partner, and I realized that Jake had a lot of those qualities. So you decided to pursue him. I didn't decide anything initially. I just paid more attention to him at your party, and when I realized he was paying attention back, I thought maybe there was something worth exploring. There it was. Madison had identified Jake as a target after her breakup and used my birthday party as an opportunity to test his interest. Everything that had happened since then had been execution of a plan, not a series of accidental emotional discoveries. Thank you for being honest with me about that. Are you angry? I'm hurt. But I understand that sometimes these things happen, and fighting about it won't change anything. You're being so mature about this, Em. I don't think I could handle it as well if the situation were reversed. I hope you never have to find out. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone, marveling at Madison's ability to confess to deliberately pursuing my boyfriend while making it sound like a series of innocent coincidences that had spiraled beyond her control. But more importantly, I now had confirmation of what I'd suspected. This hadn't been a sudden romantic awakening. It had been a calculated campaign with specific goals and strategic timing, which meant I could plan my own campaign in response. The next few days passed in a strange haze of normalcy, punctuated by moments of surreal revelation. I went to work, attended meetings, responded to emails, and maintained conversations with friends and colleagues who had no idea that my entire personal life had imploded over the weekend. The routine felt both comforting and absurd, like playing house while the actual house burned down around me. Madison and Jake, meanwhile, were apparently moving quickly to establish their new relationship. Through social media and mutual friends, I learned that they'd been seen together at several public locations around Austin. Not hiding exactly, but not announcing anything either. They were letting the news spread organically through our social circles while maintaining the fiction that this was all very new and unexpected. The first real test of my resolve came on Thursday evening when my friend Chloe called with gossip she thought I needed to hear. Emma, I don't know how to tell you this, but I saw Jake and Madison together at Barton Springs today. They were definitely on a date, like holding hands and looking very coupley. Chloe had been my closest friend since college and had never particularly liked Madison. She'd watched my sister's pattern of acquisition over the years with the kind of protective outrage that only a true friend can maintain on your behalf. I knew she was expecting me to be devastated by this news, and probably prepared to spend the evening helping me process my emotions about seeing them together so soon after my breakup. How did they seem? I asked. How did they seem? Emma. They seemed like two people who've been dating for months, not like people who just discovered their feelings for each other. They were way too comfortable together for this to be new. That's interesting. Interesting? Emma, are you okay? You sound weird. I'm fine. Processing everything, but fine. Are you processing the fact that your sister stole your boyfriend and they're already parading around town together? Because that's what just happened. I know what happened. Chloe. Then why aren't you furious? Why aren't you planning elaborate revenge scenarios? Why aren't you crying into a pint of ice cream while plotting Madison's social destruction? It was a fair question. The Emma that Chloe had known for 15 years would have been devastated by this betrayal. She would have called in sick to work, spent days analyzing every detail of what had gone wrong, and probably written long emails to Jake that she was too smart to actually send. But this Emma was different. This Emma had spent the past week documenting lies, recording confessions, and building a comprehensive case file of deliberate deception. This Emma had moved past hurt feelings into strategic planning mode. I think I'm just too shocked to be angry yet, I told her, which wasn't entirely untrue. Well, when the shock wears off and the anger kicks in, call me. I have some thoughts about appropriate responses to sister betrayal. I will. Thanks for looking out for me. Always. After Chloe hung up, I added her sighting of Jake and Madison to my documentation file. The timeline was becoming clearer with each new piece of information. They'd moved from secret meetings to public dates within days of Jake's breakup conversation with me, suggesting that their relationship planning had been more advanced than either of them had admitted. Friday morning brought the call I'd been expecting, but dreading. My mother, who'd undoubtedly heard about recent developments through the family communication network that Madison and I had both inherited and perfected. Emma, honey, I just talked to Madison. She told me about you and Jake breaking up and about her feelings for him. I wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing. My mother's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd been briefed on the official version of events and wasn't sure how much additional information she should acknowledge having. I'm okay, Mom. It's been a difficult week, but I'm managing. Madison is very worried about you. She said you've been surprisingly understanding about everything, but she's concerned that you might be suppressing your real feelings. Of course, Madison was worried about my reaction. She needed me to be predictably emotional and dramatic so she could position herself as the reasonable party trying to manage an unfortunate but unavoidable situation. My calm acceptance was probably making her nervous because it didn't fit the narrative she'd constructed. I think I'm just trying to be mature about it. These things happen sometimes. They do happen, but that doesn't make them easy to deal with. You and Jake were together for 2 years. It's natural to be upset about the relationship ending, especially under these circumstances. What circumstances do you mean, Mom? There was a pause while my mother decided how direct she wanted to be about Madison's role in my breakup. Well, having your sister involved makes it more complicated than a typical breakup. True, but Madison didn't plan for this to happen. Sometimes people just connect in unexpected ways. That's a very generous perspective, honey. It's the only perspective that makes sense. Getting angry or resentful won't change anything, and it would just make family gatherings awkward for everyone. You're probably right about that, but Emma, you don't have to be the perfect daughter who handles everything gracefully. You're allowed to have feelings about this situation. I know, Mom, and I do have feelings about it. I'm just trying to process them privately rather than creating drama. Okay, just remember that I'm here if you need to talk. And maybe we should postpone the family barbecue next weekend. Give everyone some time to adjust to the new situation. The family barbecue. I'd completely forgotten about the monthly gathering at my aunt's house, where Madison would presumably debut her new relationship to our extended family, where everyone would watch carefully to see how I handled being in the same space as my former boyfriend and my sister who'd stolen him. Actually, I think we should go ahead with the barbecue as planned. It might be good for everyone to see that we can handle this like adults. Are you sure? It might be awkward. It might be, but avoiding family events isn't going to make this situation go away. Better to address it directly and move forward. If you're certain you're ready for that. I'm certain. After my mother hung up, I realized that I'd just committed myself to attending a family gathering where Madison and Jake would make their relationship public, where I'd be expected to smile and congratulate them and demonstrate my complete acceptance of their happiness. Perfect. Because I had something special planned for that barbecue, something that would make Madison's debut as Jake's girlfriend much more memorable than she was anticipating. I spent Friday afternoon at an electronics store, purchasing a small device that I'd researched extensively over the past few days. A digital voice recorder, nearly invisible when attached to clothing, with enough memory to capture hours of conversation and sophisticated enough to filter background noise for crystal-clear audio quality. Technology had come a long way since the days when people had to rely on memory and hearsay to prove what had been said in private conversations. Now, you could document everything with professional-grade clarity, creating an indisputable record of exactly who said what and when they said it. Madison and Jake thought they'd managed their transition perfectly, crafting a story that painted them as reluctant participants in an unavoidable romantic fate. They thought they'd minimize their culpability by emphasizing timing and spontaneity rather than planning and pursuit. They had no idea that I'd been recording our conversations all week. They had no idea that I had documented proof of their deliberate deception. And they definitely had no idea that their family debut was going to become something very different than the celebration they were expecting. Sunday's barbecue was going to be interesting. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that makes Austin summers legendary. I woke up early, not because I'd slept poorly, but because my body seemed to understand that today required extra preparation time. The family barbecue at Aunt Carmen's house in Cedar Park was scheduled to start at 2, which gave me 6 hours to finalize my strategy and mentally rehearse what was about to unfold. I'd spent Saturday evening reviewing my documentation one final time, organizing audio files and timeline notes into a coherent narrative that painted a clear picture of Madison and Jake's deception. The evidence was overwhelming, but evidence was only useful if it was presented at the right moment in the right way to the right audience. The shower helped clear my head, and as I stood under the hot water, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I was about to do. For 26 years, I'd been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and prioritized harmony above personal satisfaction. Today, I was going to shatter that peace in a way that would fundamentally change how everyone saw Madison, Jake, and me. There would be no going back after this. No pretending that everything was fine. No gracious acceptance of their relationship. No mature handling of an unfortunate situation. Once I revealed what I knew and how I'd learned it, the family dynamics that had shaped my entire life would be permanently altered. But as I dried my hair and selected my outfit for the day, I realized that I wasn't nervous about destroying those dynamics. I was excited about it. I chose a simple blue sundress that Jake had once said brought out my eyes, paired with sandals. That would be comfortable for standing around my aunt's backyard for several hours. The irony of wearing something Jake had complimented wasn't lost on me, but it felt appropriate. Today was about reclaiming my narrative, and every detail mattered. The drive to Cedar Park took 45 minutes through Sunday traffic, giving me time to listen to the recordings I'd collected over the past week. Hearing Jake's voice admitting his feelings for Madison, listening to Madison's careful manipulation of our phone conversation, reviewing my mother's concerns about family awkwardness. By the time I pulled into Aunt Carmen's driveway, I felt completely prepared for whatever was about to happen. The Rodriguez family barbecues followed the same pattern they'd maintained for 15 years. Aunt Carmen provided the location and coordinated the main dishes, while everyone else contributed sides, drinks, and desserts, according to a rotation system that had been refined through years of trial and error. The backyard setup was always identical: Folding tables arranged in a U shape under string lights, coolers positioned strategically for easy access, and lawn chairs scattered around the perimeter for people who preferred sitting to mingling. I arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a pasta salad I'd prepared that morning and maintaining the same cheerful demeanor I brought to every family gathering. Aunt Carmen greeted me with the kind of careful hug that suggested she'd been briefed on recent developments and wasn't sure how to navigate the emotional landscape. "Emma, sweetheart, how are you doing? Your mother mentioned that you've had some changes in your personal life recently." "I'm doing well, Aunt Carmen. Thanks for asking. The pasta salad has the recipe you requested, by the way. I wrote it down in case anyone wants to make it themselves. You're always so thoughtful. Go put that on the food table and get yourself something to drink. Your cousins are here, and I think Sophia has been waiting to talk to you." Sophia was 28, married to a teacher named Marcus, and had always been the family member most likely to ask direct questions about uncomfortable topics. She was also Madison's least favorite cousin because she'd never been impressed by Madison's charm and had a talent for seeing through carefully constructed social performances. I found Sophia near the drink cooler, as predicted, and she immediately pulled me aside for the conversation I'd been expecting. "Emma, I heard about Jake. Are you okay? Because if you need someone to help you hide his body, I know people. That's very kind of you, but unnecessary. I'm handling the situation just fine." "Are you handling it, or are you pretending to handle it? Because there's a difference, and this family has a long history of confusing the two." Sophia's directness was exactly what I needed to gauge how much information had circulated through our extended family network. "What exactly did you hear?" "I heard that Jake decided he was in love with Madison and broke up with you to pursue her. I heard that Madison claims this was all a big surprise to everyone involved. And I heard that you're being remarkably mature and understanding about the whole thing." That's essentially accurate. The mature and understanding part is what worries me. You've been with Jake for 2 years, Emma. He doesn't get to trade you in for your sister and have everyone congratulate him on following his heart. Sometimes relationships end, Sophia. Sometimes people realize they're not compatible long-term. And sometimes people are selfish assholes who want what they can't have until they figure out how to take it anyway. I studied my cousin's face, noting the protective anger that I'd seen from several friends over the past week. Everyone who cared about me was furious on my behalf, which would make the eventual revelation even more impactful. I appreciate your concern, but I'd rather focus on moving forward than staying angry about what happened. Fine. But when you change your mind about that, call me. I have thoughts about appropriate responses to sister betrayal. At 2:30, Madison arrived with Jake in tow, both of them looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine advertisement for summer romance. Madison wore a flowing white dress that made her look ethereal and innocent, while Jake had chosen a navy button-down that I'd never seen before. They entered the backyard holding hands, but separated immediately upon seeing the assembled family members, as if they were still testing the waters of public affection. The reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Polite smiles, careful greetings, and the kind of subtle tension that indicated everyone knew something significant had changed, but wasn't sure how to acknowledge it. Madison handled the attention with her usual grace, accepting hugs and making small talk while Jake lingered awkwardly nearby, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of speculation. I watched their arrival from my position near the food table, noting the way Madison's eyes found mine immediately, and the relief that flashed across her face when I smiled and waved normally. She'd been worried about my reaction to seeing them together, but my calm demeanor was reassuring her that everything was proceeding according to plan. "Emma!" Madison approached me with the kind of bright enthusiasm that suggested she was performing for our watching relatives. "You look beautiful. I love that dress on you." "Thank you. You look gorgeous too. That white dress is stunning." "Thanks." I wasn't sure what was appropriate for today, but Jake said it looked nice. The casual mention of Jake's opinion was clearly intended to normalize their relationship dynamic in front of our family. Madison was establishing that they were a couple now, that they consulted each other about decisions, that their connection was natural and comfortable. Jake has excellent taste, I replied, maintaining my supportive sister act. Jake joined us at that moment, looking visibly nervous about his first family gathering as Madison's boyfriend rather than mine. Hi, Emma. Thank you for being so understanding. About everything. I know this situation is complicated. Not complicated at all. I'm happy for both of you. The words seemed to relax him slightly, though he still looked like someone who expected conflict to erupt at any moment. I was worried that seeing us together might be awkward for you. It's only awkward if we make it awkward. You're both adults who made a choice about what you wanted. I respect that choice. Madison beamed at this response, clearly proud of how well she'd managed the family dynamics. Emma has been so amazing about everything, Jake. She's the best sister anyone could ask for. You really are, Jake agreed, and I could see genuine gratitude in his expression. Not everyone would handle this situation with such grace. If only they knew how much grace I was actually demonstrating by not revealing what I knew about their timeline and methodology. But patience was a virtue I'd cultivated over many years of dealing with Madison's acquisitions, and today it would serve me well. The afternoon proceeded according to the standard barbecue schedule. Casual mingling from 2 to 4, serious eating from 4 to 6, and family storytelling and gossip from 6 until people started heading home around 8. Madison and Jake navigated the social dynamics carefully, acting affectionate but not overly demonstrative, answering questions about their relationship with the same rehearsed responses they'd been perfecting all week. By 5 o'clock, most of the family had adjusted to seeing them together, and conversations had moved beyond the novelty of their pairing to more routine topics. Madison was relaxed now, confident that she'd successfully introduced her new relationship, without major drama or family discord. That's when I decided it was time to make my announcement. I waited until the natural lull that always occurred around 5:30, when people had finished eating but weren't ready to start the evening phase of storytelling and catching up. Most of the family was gathered in the central area of the backyard, seated in lawn chairs or standing in small conversational clusters. The perfect audience for what I was about to do. Everyone, I called out, raising my voice just enough to capture attention without seeming aggressive. I have something I'd like to share with all of you. The chatter died down as family members turned toward me with the kind of polite attention that suggested they were expecting a routine announcement about work or travel plans. Madison looked curious but not concerned, probably assuming I was going to make some gracious statement about supporting her relationship with Jake. As most of you know by now, Jake and I ended our relationship this week because he developed feelings for Madison. I kept my voice calm and factual, like I was delivering a weather report rather than discussing personal trauma. Madison and Jake have both assured me that nothing inappropriate happened while we were together, and that their connection was as much of a surprise to them as it was to everyone else. Nods of acknowledgement rippled through the group. This was the version of events that had been circulating through family channels all week, and my public confirmation of it seemed to validate the narrative that Madison and Jake had been promoting. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank them both for being so honest with me about their feelings, and to publicly express my support for their relationship. Madison smiled radiantly, clearly moved by what appeared to be a generous gesture of sisterly love. Jake looked relieved that I was reinforcing the mature, amicable breakup story rather than creating conflict or drama. However, I continued, my tone remaining steady, I also think it's important for everyone to understand exactly how their relationship developed, so that we can all appreciate the timeline and circumstances involved. The first hint of tension appeared on Madison's face. Jake shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something in my presentation was about to change direction. Madison, would you mind sharing with everyone when you first realized you had feelings for Jake? She looked momentarily startled by the direct question, but recovered quickly. Well, I think it was at Emma's birthday party. That was when I first saw him differently, when we really connected. And Jake, when did you first notice Madison in a romantic way? Jake glanced at Madison before answering. The same night, really. Emma's party was when everything changed. That's interesting, I said thoughtfully, because I've been thinking a lot about that night, trying to understand what I might have missed or misunderstood. And I realized that there were some things that didn't quite add up with that timeline. Now both Madison and Jake were looking distinctly uncomfortable, though they were trying to maintain their composed facades for the benefit of our watching family members. For instance, Madison, when we talked on the phone this week, you mentioned that you'd started thinking about Jake differently after your breakup with David. David broke up with you 3 weeks before my birthday party, didn't he? Yes, about that time frame. So you'd been considering Jake as a romantic prospect for 3 weeks before my birthday party, but you didn't act on those feelings until that specific night. Madison's smile was becoming strained. Emma, I don't think this level of detail is really necessary. Actually, I think it is necessary. Because the story you've both been telling makes it sound like your feelings developed spontaneously at my party, but your own words suggest that at least some of this was planned in advance. The backyard had gone completely silent. Every family member was now focused on our conversation with the kind of intense attention usually reserved for dramatic television shows. Planned is a strong word, Jake interjected. Feelings aren't something you can plan. You're absolutely right, Jake. Feelings aren't something you can plan. But actions are, conversations are, secret meetings are. Madison's face went pale. Emma, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you've been lying to me and to everyone else about when your relationship actually started. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, connecting it to the small Bluetooth speaker that Aunt Carmen used for background music during family gatherings. Madison, this is from our phone conversation on Wednesday when you were explaining how your feelings developed. I pressed play, and Madison's voice filled the backyard with crystal clarity. I had noticed him before. He's always been sweet to me at family events, and I thought he was attractive. But I never considered acting on it because he was with you. When did you start considering acting on it? Honestly, after David and I broke up, I started thinking about what I really wanted in a partner, and I realized that Jake had a lot of those qualities. So you decided to pursue him. I didn't decide anything initially. I just paid more attention to him at your party, and when I realized he was paying attention back, I thought maybe there was something worth exploring. I stopped the recording and looked directly at Madison, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. So, according to your own words, Madison, you identified Jake as a target after your breakup and used my birthday party as an opportunity to test his interest. That doesn't sound like a spontaneous romantic awakening. That sounds like a calculated... Thoughts, Emma? You recorded our private conversation? Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. I recorded several conversations this week. Would you like to hear what Jake said when he broke up with me? I didn't wait for an answer before playing the next clip. Your birthday party was when I first really saw her differently, but the feelings have been building since then. Since 11 days ago. Emma, you're making this harder than it needs to be. I stopped the recording again. Jake told me that his feelings had been building since my birthday party. But earlier today, he told all of you that his feelings developed at my birthday party. Which version is true, Jake? Jake looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Emma, taking things out of context like this isn't fair. What context am I missing? You told me your feelings had been building for 11 days. You told our family that everything changed in one night. One of those statements is a lie. I played another clip, this one from my conversation with Madison about their secret meetings. We've talked a few times since your party, Nothing inappropriate, just conversations about life and relationships and what we're both looking for. What kind of conversations? Just talking through my feelings about David and Jake sharing some of his thoughts about commitment and partnership. Where did these conversations happen? Different places, coffee shops mostly. Sometimes at his apartment if we needed privacy to really talk through everything. The silence in the backyard was deafening. I could see comprehension dawning on the faces of my family members as they processed the implications of what they were hearing. So Madison and Jake have been having private conversations at his apartment for weeks, discussing their feelings and their future together, while Jake was still my boyfriend and while Madison was pretending to support our relationship. "Emma, please stop," Madison pleaded. "You're twisting everything." "Am I twisting it? Let me play one more clip from yesterday when I asked Madison directly about her feelings. Are you in love with Jake? I think I might be. And he's in love with you? He says he is. So you're planning to start a relationship? We're going to explore what's between us and see where it leads." I put my phone back in my purse and looked around at my assembled family members, noting the shock, anger, and disappointment on their faces. I'm not twisting anything. I'm simply presenting the truth that Madison and Jake have been systematically hiding from all of us. They didn't fall in love at my birthday party. They planned a campaign to steal my boyfriend, executed that plan over several weeks, and then lied to everyone about how it happened. Madison was crying now, but not the strategic tears she usually deployed for maximum effect. These were tears of genuine panic and humiliation. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "It wasn't like that. We tried to fight our feelings. We didn't want to hurt you." "You tried to fight your feelings by meeting secretly at Jake's apartment? You tried to protect me by planning your future together while Jake was still my boyfriend?" "Emma, that's enough," my mother said sharply, though I couldn't tell if she was angry with me for creating this scene or with Madison for causing it. "Actually, Mom, it's not enough. Because there's one more thing that everyone should know about Madison and Jake's beautiful love story." I pulled up the photos on my phone, the ones I'd taken from my car outside Jake's apartment building the previous Sunday. These were taken last Sunday afternoon. Madison's car parked next to Jake's. Jake greeting her with flowers. Both of them walking into his building together, clearly comfortable and familiar with each other. I held up the phone so everyone could see the timestamp clearly. Last Sunday was the day before Jake broke up with me. So while he was telling me he needed space to think about our relationship, he was actually planning a romantic afternoon with my sister. The explosion of angry voices was immediate and overwhelming. My aunts and cousins erupted in indignant fury, all talking at once about betrayal and deception and family loyalty. My mother looked like she might faint. Uncle Roberto, who'd always been protective of me, was advancing toward Jake with the kind of expression that suggested physical violence might be imminent. Through the chaos, I watched Madison and Jake's carefully constructed narrative collapse completely. There was no way to explain away the evidence I'd presented, no way to reframe their deception as anything other than deliberate betrayal. But the most satisfying moment came when I saw Madison realize that her tears and apologies weren't working. For the first time in her life, her beauty and charm couldn't save her from the consequences of her actions. The aftermath of my revelation created the kind of family chaos that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. Uncle Roberto had to be physically restrained from confronting Jake, while Aunt Carmen alternated between comforting my mother and expressing her own outrage about the situation. Madison continued crying, but her tears only seemed to increase everyone's anger rather than generating the sympathy she was accustomed to receiving. Jake, meanwhile, looked like someone who'd been caught in a natural disaster he hadn't seen coming. He kept trying to explain that they'd never meant to hurt anyone, that their feelings had been genuine even if their methods had been questionable, that he'd never intended for things to unfold the way they had. "Intentions don't matter when the actions are deliberately deceptive," Sophia snapped at him. You played Emma for a fool while you and her sister planned your little romance behind her back. It wasn't planned, Jake insisted desperately. The feelings were real. We just didn't know how to handle them appropriately. You could have broken up with Emma before starting your relationship with Madison, Cousin Maria pointed out. You could have been honest about what was happening instead of lying to everyone involved. We were trying to minimize the damage, Madison said through her tears. We thought if we could transition carefully, it would be less painful for everyone. Less painful? Aunt Carmen's voice rose to a pitch that made everyone flinch. You thought lying to Emma's face while you stole her boyfriend would be less painful than telling the truth? I remained quiet during this exchange, watching Madison and Jake attempt to defend their actions while my family members systematically dismantled every justification they offered. There was something deeply satisfying about witnessing their discomfort, but more importantly, I was documenting their responses for future reference. Every excuse they made, every attempt to minimize their deception, every effort to reframe their behavior as well-intentioned mistake was being cataloged by a dozen witnesses who would remember this conversation long after the initial anger had faded. After 20 minutes of increasingly heated discussion, my mother finally stepped in to restore some semblance of order. This is not the time or place for this conversation to continue, she announced with the kind of maternal authority that could still silence grown adults. Madison and Jake, I think you should leave. Emma, we need to talk privately. Madison looked around the backyard desperately, searching for any family member who might offer support or understanding. But the faces staring back at her were uniformly cold and disapproving. Even the relatives who'd always been charmed by her beauty and personality were looking at her like they were seeing her clearly for the first time. Emma, please. Madison approached me one last time. Can we talk about this privately? Let me explain what really happened. I think we've heard enough explanations for one day, I replied calmly. Your own words speak pretty clearly about what really happened. But you don't understand the whole situation. There were reasons. Madison. I cut her off with the kind of quiet firmness I'd never used with her before. I understand the situation perfectly. You wanted something that belonged to me, you developed a plan to take it, and you executed that plan successfully. The only thing I didn't understand was how calculated it all was until I started paying attention to your actual words instead of your performances. Jake stepped forward, looking like he wanted to try one more time to salvage something from the wreckage of their public humiliation. Emma, I know I handled this badly. I know I hurt you. But my feelings for Madison are real, and I hope someday you can understand that people can't always control who they fall in love with. You're absolutely right, Jake. People can't control their feelings, but they can control their actions. They can control whether they lied to their girlfriend for weeks while pursuing her sister. They can control whether they create elaborate deceptions to justify their betrayal. They can control whether they respect the people they claim to care about enough to tell them the truth. I was trying to find the right way to tell you. The right way would have been immediately. The right way would have been before you started meeting Madison secretly. The right way would have been before you made me complicit in my own humiliation by pretending everything was normal while you planned your exit strategy. Jake had no response to this, probably because there was no response that could adequately address the scope of his deception. Madison made one final attempt to control the narrative. Emma, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I'm still your sister. Family has to matter more than this. You're right, I said quietly. Family should matter more than this. Which is why it's so devastating that you chose a man over your relationship with me. Which is why it's so disappointing that you thought I was stupid enough to believe your lies indefinitely. I never thought you were stupid. You thought I was something worse than stupid, Madison. You thought I was disposable. The silence that followed this statement felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone in the backyard. Because they all knew I was right. Madison had treated me like a temporary obstacle to be managed rather than a sister whose feelings mattered. Jake and Madison left 10 minutes later, departing separately to avoid the appearance of coordination, but both looking like people who'd been publicly stripped of their dignity. The family gathering dissolved shortly afterward, with relatives offering me hugs and words of support before heading home to process what they'd witnessed. By 7 o'clock, only my mother, Aunt Carmen, and I remained in the backyard, sitting among the scattered remnants of what should have been a routine family barbecue. "Emma, I need you to help me understand what just happened," my mother said finally. "Not the facts, because those are clear enough, but what you were thinking when you decided to handle it this way." I was thinking that I was tired of being the only person who had to be mature and understanding when Madison took things that belonged to me. "So, you planned this confrontation deliberately." "I planned to tell the truth about what actually happened, yes." "You recorded private conversations and orchestrated a public humiliation." "I documented lies and revealed deception. Madison and Jake humiliated themselves by lying to everyone for weeks." Aunt Carmen, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up for the first time since Madison and Jake had left. "I have to ask, Emma, do you feel better now? Was this worth destroying your relationship with your sister permanently?" My relationship with Madison was destroyed the moment she decided to steal my boyfriend and lie to my face about it. I just made sure everyone else understood what kind of person she really is. But the recording, the public confrontation, the deliberate cruelty of it all, that's not like you. You're right. It's not like me. The old me would have stepped aside gracefully and let Madison have whatever she wanted while everyone praised me for being the bigger person. But the old me was a doormat who confused enabling bad behavior with keeping the peace. My mother looked like she was struggling to reconcile this version of me with the daughter she'd raised to be accommodating and diplomatic. "I understand that you were hurt and angry, but there were other ways to handle this situation." "What other ways, Mom?" "I could have confronted them privately and given them the opportunity to craft a better lie. I could have kept their secrets and let them continue deceiving our family. I could have smiled and congratulated them on their beautiful love story while everyone felt sorry for poor Emma who lost her boyfriend to her prettier, more charming sister. You could have chosen not to seek revenge." "This wasn't revenge, Mom. Revenge would have been irrational and disproportionate. This was accountability." Madison and Jake made deliberate choices to deceive and manipulate everyone around them. All I did was make sure those choices had appropriate consequences. The conversation continued for another hour, with my mother and aunt alternating between concern for my emotional state and disappointment in my methods. They understood why I was angry, but they were troubled by the calculated nature of my response and worried about the long-term implications for family relationships. I appreciated their concern, but I wasn't interested in their approval. For the first time in my adult life, I'd stood up for myself without worrying about how it would affect other people's comfort or convenience. I'd chosen truth over harmony, justice over diplomacy, self-respect over family peace. And despite the chaos and conflict it had created, I felt more powerful and authentic than I'd ever felt before. The week following the barbecue brought a series of consequences that rippled through every aspect of my life in Austin. Within 24 hours, the story of Madison and Jake's public exposure had spread beyond our immediate family to friends, co-workers, and casual acquaintances who'd known us as a couple. The level of detail in my documentation, combined with the dramatic nature of the confrontation, made it the kind of story that people couldn't resist sharing. Monday morning at work felt surreal, with colleagues who'd heard various versions of events approaching me throughout the day to offer support, express outrage on my behalf, or simply satisfy their curiosity about what had actually happened. I found myself in the strange position of being simultaneously the victim of betrayal and the architect of revenge, roles that seemed to confuse people who were trying to figure out how to respond appropriately. My supervisor, Jennifer, called me into her office around noon to check on my emotional state and ensure that personal drama wouldn't affect my professional performance. I assured her that I was handling the situation well and that my work wouldn't suffer, but I could see the concern in her expression as she studied my composed demeanor. "Emma, you seem remarkably calm for someone who just went through what you went through. Are you sure you're processing everything in a healthy way?" "I think I'm processing it exactly the way it needs to be processed. Sometimes dramatic situations require dramatic responses. But the public nature of your confrontation, the recording of private conversations, the deliberate humiliation aspect, that's not typical behavior for you." "You're right. It's not typical behavior for me, but typical behavior for me would have resulted in Madison and Jake getting everything they wanted while I pretended to be happy about it." Jennifer nodded slowly, clearly trying to understand my perspective while maintaining her professional concern for my well-being. "Just promise me that if you need time off or professional support to work through this, you'll let me know. We have excellent employee assistance programs. I'll keep that in mind." The rest of Monday brought a series of text messages and voicemails from people who'd heard about the barbecue confrontation and wanted to express their opinions about my methods. Some praised my courage in standing up to Madison and Jake's deception. Others expressed concern about the public nature of my response and the potential damage to family relationships. Notably absent from this communication were any messages from Madison or Jake themselves. They'd apparently decided that radio silence was their best strategy for dealing with the aftermath of their exposure, at least where I was concerned. Tuesday evening brought an unexpected visitor to my apartment. Chloe arrived with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine, clearly prepared for a lengthy debriefing session about recent events. "I heard about Sunday," she said as soon as I opened the door. "Multiple people have told me multiple versions of what happened, and I need to hear the real story from you." We settled on my couch with pad thai and wine, and I walked her through the entire sequence of events from my birthday party to the barbecue confrontation. Chloe listened without interruption, her expressions shifting from satisfaction to amazement to concern, as I described my evidence gathering and strategic planning. "Emma, that was brilliant," she said when I finished. "Absolutely brilliant. You documented everything, caught them in multiple lies, and exposed them in front of the exact audience that would hold them accountable. I'm genuinely impressed by how thoroughly you destroyed their narrative. Thank you. But I'm also a little worried about you." "Why?" "Because this level of strategic thinking and emotional control isn't normal for someone who just had their heart broken by their boyfriend and sister. You're acting like someone who's in complete control of the situation, not someone who's been devastated by betrayal." I considered her observation while sipping my wine. "Maybe I'm not devastated. Maybe I'm liberated." "Liberated from what?" "From pretending that Madison's happiness matters more than my dignity. From accepting that Jake's comfort is more important than my right to honesty. From believing that keeping the peace is worth more than demanding accountability." Chloe studied my face carefully. "You're not sad about losing Jake?" "I'm sad about losing 2 years of my life to someone who could lie to my face for weeks while planning his exit strategy. I'm sad about discovering that the man I thought I loved was capable of systematic deception. But I'm not sad about losing Jake specifically, because the Jake I thought I was in love with never actually existed." "And Madison?" "Madison stopped being my sister the moment she decided I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a person whose feelings mattered. That's a pretty definitive break from someone you've known your entire life. It's the appropriate response to someone who's been using me my entire life." Wednesday brought the first direct communication from Madison since the barbecue, in the form of a lengthy email that arrived at 6 in the morning. The message was clearly crafted to address several audiences simultaneously, written with the knowledge that I might share it with family members or friends who were following our situation. The email began with an elaborate apology for her deception, and an acknowledgement that her methods had been inappropriate, regardless of her intentions. She explained that she'd been overwhelmed by her feelings for Jake and had handled the situation poorly because she was terrified of losing me as a sister while also being unable to deny what she felt was true love. The middle section focused on family loyalty and her hope that we could eventually work through our differences because blood relationships were more important than romantic relationships. She emphasized her regret about the timing and methodology of her pursuit of Jake, while stopping short of expressing regret about the relationship itself. The conclusion was a plea for private communication and eventual reconciliation, combined with criticism of my decision to handle our conflict publicly rather than working through it within the family. I read the email 3 times, noting the careful language choices and strategic emotional appeals. Madison was attempting to rebuild her narrative by positioning herself as someone who'd made mistakes in service of genuine love, rather than someone who'd executed a deliberate campaign of deception and manipulation. I forwarded the email to my mother without comment, knowing that she would share it with other family members and that everyone would form their own opinions about Madison's sincerity and accountability. Thursday brought news that I'd been expecting but hadn't been actively seeking. Through mutual friends, I learned that Madison and Jake's relationship was experiencing significant strain in the aftermath of their public exposure. Apparently, the stress of family disapproval and social judgment was affecting their dynamic in ways they hadn't anticipated. Jake had reportedly been questioning whether their relationship was worth the cost to his reputation and social connections. Madison was struggling with the loss of family support and the damage to her carefully cultivated image as the charming, beloved sister who could do no wrong. Most tellingly, they were apparently arguing about responsibility for the current situation, with each of them blaming the other for the methodological choices that had led to their public humiliation. I found this information interesting but not particularly satisfying. Their relationship problems were a natural consequence of building a foundation on deception and betrayal, not something I needed to orchestrate or celebrate. Friday evening brought the most significant development of the week, in the form of a phone call from my father. Dad lived in Houston now and generally stayed out of family drama, but the scope and intensity of recent events had apparently reached his attention through multiple channels. "Emma, I've been hearing some concerning things about what happened at the barbecue last weekend." "I imagine you have." "Your mother seems to think you've had some kind of breakdown and started acting out in ways that aren't characteristic of your personality." "I haven't had a breakdown, Dad. I just stopped accepting unacceptable behavior from people who expect me to prioritize their comfort over my own dignity." "Tell me what happened from your perspective." I gave him the same factual account I'd provided to everyone else, focusing on documented timelines and recorded conversations rather than emotional interpretations. Dad listened without commenting, asking only clarifying questions about specific details. "So Madison and Jake systematically deceived you for weeks while planning to transition from your relationship to theirs." "That's correct." My father's understanding of the situation brought a clarity that I hadn't realized I needed. Unlike other family members who were conflicted between loyalty to Madison and outrage over her behavior, Dad approached the entire scenario with the kind of analytical detachment that comes from years of business experience and emotional distance from daily family dynamics. "Emma, what you've described isn't a family conflict that got out of hand. It's a case study in manipulation and the consequences of enablement. Madison didn't just betray you with Jake. She's been conditioning everyone around her to accept increasingly problematic behavior by making her happiness everyone else's responsibility." That's exactly what it felt like, but I couldn't articulate it that clearly. "And your response wasn't vindictive or cruel. It was strategic and proportionate. You used their own words and actions to hold them accountable for their choices." "That's not revenge, Emma. That's justice." The validation from my father meant more than I'd expected it to. For the first time since the barbecue confrontation, I felt completely confident that my methods had been appropriate rather than excessive. Your mother is worried about the long-term implications for family relationships, but I think she's missing the bigger picture. Family relationships that depend on one person consistently sacrificing their dignity to maintain harmony aren't healthy. Relationships. They're systems of abuse disguised as love. So what happens now? Now you get to decide what kind of relationships you want to have with people, and what kind of behavior you're willing to accept from them. You've established boundaries that never existed before. The question is whether you're prepared to maintain those boundaries even when people pressure you to go back to the old patterns. That conversation with my father became the foundation for everything that followed over the next several months. Because the pressure to return to old patterns began almost immediately, as family members who'd initially supported my exposure of Madison and Jake's deception started expressing concern about the ongoing division in our family structure. 3. Weeks after the barbecue, my mother called to inform me that Madison had been struggling with depression and anxiety since our confrontation. She'd taken time off work, was considering therapy, and had been asking repeatedly whether I might be willing to have a private conversation about rebuilding our relationship. She knows she made mistakes, Emma. She's genuinely remorseful about how everything happened, but she's also your sister, and she's suffering. I'm sorry to hear that Madison is struggling. Mental health challenges are serious, and I hope she gets the professional support she needs. But you're not willing to talk to her. I'm not willing to participate in another performance where Madison's emotional state becomes my responsibility to manage. That's not what I'm asking for. It's exactly what you're asking for, Mom. You want me to prioritize Madison's comfort over my own boundaries because her distress is visible and dramatic, while my healing process is quiet and internal. I want my daughters to find a way to coexist in the same family. We can coexist, but coexistence doesn't require me to pretend that what Madison did was acceptable or to absolve her of responsibility for the consequences of her choices. 6 weeks after the barbecue, I received news through cousin Sophia that Madison and Jake had broken up. Apparently, the stress of family disapproval and social judgment had revealed fundamental incompatibilities in their personalities and values that their initial passion had obscured. Jake had grown tired of being viewed as the villain in every social situation, while Madison had become resentful of having to defend their relationship constantly instead of enjoying the romantic fantasy she'd envisioned. Without the thrill of secrecy and the challenge of conquest, their connection had proven to be less substantial than either of them had believed. I felt no satisfaction about their breakup, but I also felt no sympathy. They'd destroyed multiple relationships in pursuit of something they'd convinced themselves was worth any sacrifice, only to discover that their foundation was too weak to support the weight of their ambitions. 2 months after the barbecue, Madison attempted direct contact for the first time since her email. She showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning, looking genuinely fragile in a way that had nothing to do with strategic vulnerability. Emma, please, can we just talk for 10 minutes? I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but I'm your sister and I miss you. I studied her face through my doorway, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the absence of her usual careful styling. She looked like someone who'd been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and hadn't enjoyed the experience. What do you want to talk about, Madison? I want to apologize. Really apologize, not the kind of apology where I try to excuse what I did or minimize the damage. I want to take responsibility for my choices and ask if there's any way we can eventually move past this. Against my better judgment, I let her in. We sat in my living room, maintaining the kind of physical distance that had never existed between us before, and Madison attempted the most honest conversation we'd ever had about our relationship dynamic. I know you think I planned everything, with Jake from the beginning, but it wasn't that calculated initially. I just noticed that he was attractive and kind, and after David broke up with me, I started wondering if Jake might be interested in someone like me. Someone like you, meaning someone who wasn't me. Someone more exciting than you, yes. I've always known that you were smarter and more accomplished, but I thought I was more fun and spontaneous. I thought if Jake saw that contrast clearly, he might prefer what I had to offer. So you decided to showcase that contrast at my birthday party. I decided to test whether my instincts were right about his interest. When he responded the way he did, I knew I could make him choose me over you if I played the situation correctly. The honesty was more brutal than I'd expected, but also more genuine than any conversation we'd ever had about her pattern of taking things that belonged to me. Why, Madison? Why was it so important to prove that you could take Jake away from me? She was quiet for a long time before answering. Because you've always been better than me at everything that actually matters. Grades, career, relationships, with our parents, respect from other people. The only thing I've ever been better at is getting men to want me. And Jake was the first man I'd ever met who seemed immune to that, who chose you instead of me without even considering me as an option. So you had to prove that wasn't actually true. I had to prove that I could still be the chosen one if I wanted to be. Even with someone who supposedly valued all the things you're good at more than the things I'm good at. And once you proved it? Once I proved it, I realized that I didn't actually want Jake for himself. I wanted him because he was yours. Because taking him away from you proved something about my power that I needed to believe was still true. The admission was devastating in its selfishness, but also illuminating in its honesty. Madison hadn't fallen in love with Jake. She'd fallen in love with the idea of being irresistible enough to steal him from someone he'd claimed to love. Did you ever consider what this would do to me? I told myself that you'd be hurt initially, but that you'd eventually understand that Jake and I were better matched, and that losing him would free you up to find someone who appreciated you more. You told yourself that destroying my relationship was actually doing me a favor. I told myself a lot of things to avoid acknowledging that I was being selfish and cruel. We talked for 2 hours, with Madison providing more insight into her motivations and methods than I'd thought she was capable of. She admitted to strategically timing her emotional breakdown at my birthday party, to deliberately scheduling meetings with Jake when she knew I was at work, to crafting her explanations about their relationship development to minimize her apparent culpability. Most importantly, she acknowledged that her pattern of taking things from me had been ongoing since childhood, and that she'd never considered the cumulative impact of those losses on my ability to trust people or feel secure in my relationships. I don't know how to undo the damage I've done, Emma, but I want to try, if you'll let me. What would trying look like? Therapy, for both of us separately and maybe together eventually. Me taking responsibility publicly for what I did instead of letting people think this was just a complicated romantic situation. Me figuring out how to have relationships and achievements that don't require taking things away from other people. And if I'm not interested in rebuilding our relationship, then I'll accept that my choices cost me my sister, and I'll live with that consequence for the rest of my life. I appreciated Madison's honesty and her apparent commitment to genuine change, but I wasn't ready to trust that her insights would translate into different behavior patterns. Too many years of experience had taught me that Madison's promises were reliable only as long as they served her immediate interests. I need time to think about this, Madison. What you did wasn't just a mistake or a moment of bad judgment. It was a systematic campaign of deception that revealed fundamental problems with how you view relationships and respect for other people. I understand. And even if I decide that I'm willing to work toward rebuilding some kind of relationship with you, it's going to be a completely different relationship than what we had before. I'm not going back to being the understanding sister who enables your behavior by absorbing the consequences of your choices. I wouldn't want you to go back to that. I think that dynamic was toxic for both of us. Madison left that afternoon with a tentative agreement that we'd both consider what a healthy sibling relationship might look like, with professional guidance and clearly established boundaries. I didn't commit to anything beyond the possibility of future conversations, but I also didn't close the door completely on eventual reconciliation. Over the following months, I learned through family channels that Madison was indeed pursuing therapy and making what appeared to be genuine efforts to understand and change her behavior patterns. She'd taken responsibility publicly for the deception surrounding her relationship with Jake, apologizing to family members for lying to them, and acknowledging that her actions had been deliberately manipulative rather than emotionally driven. Meanwhile, I was building a life that looked completely different from the one I'd been living before my birthday party revelation. I'd been promoted at work after my successful handling of a complex client situation that required exactly the kind of strategic thinking and calm determination I'd demonstrated during the Madison and Jake crisis. I'd also started dating someone new, a fellow marketing professional named David whom I'd met through a work conference. David was thoughtful, honest, and possessed of the kind of straightforward communication style that made me realize how much energy I'd been spending throughout my life trying to decode other people's hidden agendas and unspoken expectations. Most importantly, I'd learned to recognize and maintain boundaries in all my relationships, not just with Madison. I no longer automatically prioritized other people's comfort over my own needs, no longer accepted behavior that disrespected my time or feelings, no longer confused enabling dysfunction with being supportive. 8 months after the barbecue confrontation, Madison and I had our first therapy session together with a counselor who specialized in family relationship repair. The conversation was awkward and emotionally challenging, but it was also productive, in ways that our private discussions had never been. With professional guidance, we were able to identify specific behavior patterns that had characterized our relationship since childhood, understand how those patterns had served different psychological needs for both of us, and begin developing new ways of interacting that didn't require me to be perpetually accommodating or Madison to be perpetually performing. Progress was slow and sometimes frustrating, but it was genuine. Madison was learning to build self-worth that didn't depend on proving her superiority over other people, while I was learning to express my needs and preferences directly, instead of hoping that other people would intuit them. A year after the barbecue, we had dinner together for the first time since our confrontation. The conversation was careful and somewhat formal, but it was honest in a way that our previous interactions had never been. We talked about our jobs, our personal growth, our individual therapy insights, and our hopes for developing a relationship that could be sustaining rather than draining for both of us. Madison had been dating someone new for several months, a man she'd met through her own professional network rather than through connections to my life. She spoke about him with genuine enthusiasm that seemed focused on his personal qualities, rather than on what being with him might prove about her desirability or power. I told her about David, about my career advancement, about the confidence I'd gained from learning to advocate for myself effectively. I also told her about the relief I felt from no longer living in constant anxiety about when she might decide to take something important away from me. "I don't think I understood how much stress that dynamic was creating for you," Madison said. "Always having to guard your relationships and achievements because you never knew when I might target them. I don't think I understood it either, until it stopped. I'd normalized the vigilance to the point where I thought everyone lived that way. Do you think we'll ever have a normal sister relationship? I don't know what normal means for us, but I think we might eventually have a relationship that's based on mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. That would be enough for me." 2 years after the barbecue, David and I got engaged. Madison was among the first people I told, and her response was everything I could have hoped for from a sister. Genuine excitement, thoughtful questions about our plans, offers to help with wedding preparations that came without strings or expectations of special treatment. The engagement also marked another milestone in my personal development. David had proposed on the anniversary of our first date, in the same restaurant where we'd had that initial conversation about boundaries and honesty in relationships. His proposal was straightforward and heartfelt, free of dramatic gestures. or complex emotional manipulation. Most importantly, I said yes without any anxiety about whether his feelings were genuine, whether he might change his mind, or whether someone else might try to take him away from me. I'd learned to trust both, my own judgment and his integrity, in ways that would have been impossible before I'd discovered my own capacity for self-protection. Madison attended our wedding 8 months later, serving as a regular guest rather than in any special family role. She seemed genuinely happy for us, and her behavior throughout the celebration was considerate and appropriate. She'd brought her own boyfriend as her date, and they seemed comfortable and compatible in ways that suggested their relationship was built on healthier foundations than her previous romantic pursuits. During the reception, Madison and I had a brief private conversation that felt like a final acknowledgement of how far we'd both traveled from the people we'd been during the barbecue confrontation. "Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that I could change," she said. "I know it would have been easier to write me off completely. Thank you for actually doing the work to change instead of just expecting forgiveness without accountability. Do you ever regret how you handled the situation with Jake? The public confrontation, the recordings, all of it?" I considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that you and Jake made choices that required that kind of response. But I don't regret standing up for myself or refusing to accept behavior that was unacceptable. I'm glad you didn't just let us get away with it. I'm glad too." 3 years after the barbecue, I was promoted to Senior Marketing Director, a position that came with significant responsibility for strategy development and team leadership. The promotion interview process had included several scenarios that required exactly the kind of calm determination and strategic thinking that I'd developed through managing personal crises, and I'd handled them with confidence that surprised even me. Madison had also advanced professionally, earning a promotion to account manager at her firm through what appeared to be genuine competence rather than charm-based manipulation. She'd learned to build professional relationships based on reliability and expertise rather than on her ability to make people want to protect or please her. Our relationship had evolved into something that resembled friendship more than traditional sisterhood, but it was sustainable in ways that our previous dynamic had never been. We saw each other regularly but not constantly, supported each other's goals without feeling obligated to prioritize them over our own, and communicated directly about problems instead of letting resentments build toward explosive confrontations. Most importantly, I never again felt the need to document our conversations or prepare for potential betrayals. Madison had demonstrated through consistent behavior over time that she'd internalized new values about respect and honesty in relationships, while I'd developed the confidence to address problems immediately rather than allowing them to escalate toward crisis points. The last time I drove past Jake's old apartment building, I felt nothing more than mild curiosity about whether he still lived there. The intensity of anger and hurt that had once defined my feelings about him had faded into indifference, replaced by gratitude for the lessons his betrayal had taught me about my own strength and capacity for self-protection. I'd learned that being kind didn't require being accommodating, that being supportive didn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior, and that being family didn't guarantee anyone the right to treat you poorly without consequences. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable for their choices, even when that accountability is painful for everyone involved. The woman I'd become through navigating that crisis was stronger, clearer, and more authentic than the woman I'd been before Madison decided to steal my boyfriend at my birthday party. And while I wouldn't choose to repeat the experience, I was grateful for the person it had forced me to become. The story people tell now about the Rodriguez family barbecue has evolved over time, but the central message remains consistent. Sometimes the quiet ones surprise you with how loudly they can roar when they finally decide they've had enough. And sometimes the people who seem like they always get everything they want discover that getting what you want through deception and manipulation comes with costs they never considered. As for Madison and me, We learned that blood might be thicker than water, but respect and honesty are thicker than blood. And building a relationship on that foundation, even if it takes years and professional help and painful conversations about uncomfortable truths, creates something more valuable than the dysfunction we'd inherited and called love. The engagement ring that started it all eventually became a symbol not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained. The capacity to recognize my own worth, demand appropriate treatment from others, and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than convenient accommodation. Those lessons were worth more than any relationship that required me to diminish myself to maintain it. And that's how my sister stealing my boyfriend at my birthday party became the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.